Thank you so much, Sherry. So we're here and we're delighted to be joined for our next interview by the Minister of Finance of Argentina. He is Nicolas Dujovne. Thank you so much, Mr. Dujovne, for joining us.
Thanks for the invitation.
Really this year, the G20 is hosted, of course, by Argentina. So your country plays a prominent role in, first of all, mediating, I guess, possible trade wars, wars on tariffs. Was this fruitful G20? Are we going to see a U.S. versus the rest of the world attitude?
Well, it's not the U.S. versus the rest of the world. For us, first, it's an honor to be presiding the G20. Argentina was in default 2 years ago, but Argentina is re-engaging again in the international arena and being appointed as, being invited to be the president of the G20 is very important for us. Our view is that the G20 is the most important group in terms of coordinating the international macroeconomics. The most important role is for the G20 is to reach consensuses, because we need to keep this group alive, working.
But Minister, does anyone support President Trump's agenda of jacking up tariffs?
Well, there were different views in the meeting. Of course, we don't have the same type of consensus on trade that we had 1 year ago. But still, I can say that there's a broad consensus on the benefits of trade. The consensus is that trade still benefits growth, jobs, innovation, productivity, and that provides benefits for the citizens. Although there are some differences in terms of the role of multilateralism versus a vision more based on fair trade.
Well, the consensus that we've seen in our interviews in the heartland of America, in Iowa, for example, I think a soybean in Iowa is the same as a soybean in Argentina.
Yes.
I mean, if it's a soybean, it's a soybean. What does it mean for Argentinian agriculture to see a president in America who is bilateral, or maybe unilateral, or maybe mercantile? Is it to your advantage to have Trump trade policy?
Well, if we focus specifically on Argentina, in the last few months, we had some very positive news in terms of trade with the U.S. because Argentina was reinstated inside the general system of preferences, which we were outside that. So that's very important for our exporters. In terms of the tariffs to aluminum and steel, Argentina was exempted from the general increase in tariffs. So we are negotiating a permanent regime. Yes, of course, there are some differences in terms of the hike that Argentina received in terms of our exports of biofuels to the U.S. But
what about to China?
What about to China?
From Argentina to China, these kind of dynamics. Is it to your advantage to have the Trump uproar in America on trade? And does that benefit you with soybeans and agriculture products with Asia?
Well, for Argentina, we see limits to trade as a problem for general growth of the global economy. But in terms of the specifics, we were not affected in a wrong way in the last few months.
Your currency was one of the worst performers against the dollar in the region. You have concerns, I imagine, about CPI stuck above 2% month over month. How can you address them?
Well, of course, the problem behind that is inflation. Argentina still has a high rate of inflation. We received an economy that was in default with multiple FX rates, with a lot of quantitative restrictions to trade, with totally misaligned prices of the utilities. So we're in the process of normalization that in the meantime produces an inflation rate that is much higher than the one that we ambition to have. And of course, the reflection of the behavior of our FX is because we still have a higher inflation rate than our trading partners. So in real terms, it isn't that our FX deteriorates that much.
So, Minister, what is a realistic figure for inflation by year end?
Well, we have a target of 15%. Coming down from an inflation rate of 25% last year and 37% in year 2016. So inflation is coming down. Our target for next year is 10%, and then to 5% in 2 years.
But
we
Minister, 15% is unrealistic at the moment if you look at the trajectory, or am I wrong?
Well, I think that we will be pretty close to the target, but you have to consider that the inflation target plays a role. Is not a forecast, is a target that organizes the efforts that we are doing to bring down the inflation rate. So it has to be demanding. If it's not demanding, it will not play the role that we want.
I would love to know how you would speak to a congressman, a congresswoman, a senator, not too far away on Capitol Hill, about the quiet of debt. We're in America with trillion-dollar deficits. We say, oh, it's no big deal. You've lived this in the crucible of real time in Argentina in the last 2 years. How do you respond to politicians who say a higher debt, a larger debt is no big deal?
Well, for us, it was a big deal because Argentina was in default many times. So we understood the lesson. We need to keep our debt under control. We have to be solvent on an intertemporal basis. And now that growth is firming up, it's time to face the problems, to be countercyclical, and to act with responsibility, because eventually, in the near future or some years ahead, growth will not be as high as it is today. So it is time to address the problem of the fiscal problem and try not to make the debt to climb so much.
Minister Dujovne of Argentina, thank you so much for joining
Thanks for the invitation.
Today
Thanks a lot.
On Bloomberg TV. With that, we're going to hand it back to you in New York, Vani, but we'll be here throughout the day, and we have also a special show on the IMF coming up in about 35 minutes.